They march in long columns, boots pounding on the hard ground, rifles slung over their shoulders, flags fluttering in the wind. To those men, the road to the east seems like an open highway to glory. Propaganda promised a swift victory, a short campaign, a weak enemy that would fall before winter. And they believed it. German soldiers advanced through the vastness of the Soviet Union with puffed-out chests and hearts full of certainty. Many are young, some still with boyish faces. Others are veterans of previous campaigns and swear that nothing can be worse than what they have already faced. They laugh, joke, write letters saying they will be home before Christmas, but something is wrong in the air. The sun still shines during the day, but the nights begin to cool down faster than expected, a strange, dry cold that seeps into your bones. The uniforms are thin, made for the milder climates of Western Europe. The boots aren't insulated, the coats weren't designed for extreme temperatures. Still, nobody complains. To complain would be a sign of weakness. The trucks advance, raising dust, the tanks roar confidently, and the roads seem endless. Each captured village reinforces the illusion that the enemy is collapsing. Burned houses lie behind, devastated fields, bodies abandoned by the roadside. The war is already bloody, but for the Germans, it still seems controllable. The officers repeat the same phrase. It's just one more effort, soon it will all be over. And the soldiers move on. They don't know, or don't want to know, that the Russian winter doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It doesn't arrive all at once. It approaches silently, hidden in the icy morning wind, in the dew that turns to ice before dawn, in the breath that begins to run white from the mouth. While they march on confidently, the storm is already on its way. And when she arrives, she won't distinguish heroes from cowards, veterans from recruits. It will just freeze, break, kill. At that time, war still seemed like a choice. But very soon, it will become a trap with no way out. The first warning of the cold, when the weather starts to kill. At first, nobody takes it seriously. It's just a light frost in the morning, they say. A passing chill. The soldiers wake up and find their boots, hard as stone, covered in a thin layer of ice. Some laugh as they stamp their feet on the ground to warm them. Others rub their hands, blow on their fingers, complain under their breath. Nothing unbearable, or so they think, but the cold weather doesn't recede. The nights grow long and cruel. The wind cuts like a blade, piercing coats, entering collars, seeping into skin. Men tremble within shallow trenches, hugging their knees. Sleep becomes a risk. Those who sleep too deeply may not wake. The weapons begin to malfunction. Oil freezes inside the mechanisms. Bolts won't move. Machine guns jam at the most crucial moment. Soldiers bang on their rifles, curse, try to warm the metal. With their bare hands. Hands that are already numb, swollen, barely able to feel pain. The first signs of cold-related injuries appear. Toes turn white, then bluish. Some men lose feeling and only realize something is wrong when the smell of dead flesh begins to rise. Field doctors do what they can, but there are not enough medicines, nor adequate shelter. Many amputations are performed without anesthesia, with improvised saws, while the patient bites on a piece of leather to avoid screaming. Morale is starting to crack. Winter supplies fail to arrive. Trucks get stuck. Railroad tracks can't keep up with the advance. Depots are too far away. The army that rushed too fast is now paying the price. Each day, advanced unprepared takes a toll on the bodies and minds of the men. Nevertheless, the orders are clear: advance. And as the soldiers march on, it is no longer just the Soviet enemy that kills. The cold begins to choose its victims. Silent, patient, relentless. This is just the first warning. Winter is still warming up for the final blow. Lines stretch too far. The army that went beyond the limit. The further the German army advances, the more fragile it becomes. On the map, everything seems under control. Wide arrows point east, cities conquered, territory taken day after day. But the map lies. On the ground, the reality is different. Supply lines become too long, too thin, too fragile. Every truck that breaks down, every blocked road, every destroyed bridge creates a deadly void between the soldier and what keeps him alive. Food starts to run late, ammunition arrives incomplete, fuel becomes a scarce commodity. Men spend days eating frozen rations hard as stone, breaking their teeth to chew. Sometimes there is nothing, just dirty water melted from the snow. The Russian roads, which were dusty in the summer, now turn into thick mud. Trucks sink up to their axles, horses fall and can no longer get up. When the mud freezes, it becomes uneven, treacherous ice, capable of breaking legs and destroying vehicles. Moving forward becomes a slow, painful crawl. Entire units become isolated. A battalion that yesterday had contact with command, today no longer has a functioning radio. The cold kills the batteries. Messengers are sent on foot. Many never return. Some get lost in the white vastness. Others are captured. Some simply fall and freeze along the way. A feeling of abandonment begins to emerge. The soldiers realize they are too far from home, too far from help, too far from any safety. There are not enough villages to shelter them all. Many sleep in the open, digging shallow holes in the frozen earth with bayonets, protecting themselves from the wind like trapped animals. Even so, the orders remain unchanged. Advance, hold positions, do not retreat. But how can you maintain your position when there's no food? How can you move forward when your legs can barely move? How can you fight when the invisible enemy, the cold, has already won half the battle? The German army advanced too quickly. Now it's stretched out, tired, bleeding. And when an army loses its supplies, it loses more than just strength. He loses hope. Winter watches, and he knows that the moment to attack is getting closer and closer. The Russian winter falls upon them. Then, almost overnight, the world freezes. The temperature plummets mercilessly. 20 degrees, 30. On some nights, even lower. The air becomes heavy, difficult to breathe. Each breath burns the lungs. Saliva freezes before it touches the ground. Snow covers everything, swallowing roads, trails, bodies, and vehicles as if they had never existed. The engines die first. Trucks won't start. Tanks lie motionless, stuck to the icy ground. Oil turns to a thick paste inside the engines. Soldiers spend hours trying to start them, banging on the engines, lighting fires dangerously close to the vehicles. Often it's no use. Steel has defeated man. Weapons malfunction en masse. Rifles fail to fire. Machine guns jam at the most critical moment. Some men carry their weapons under their coats, close to their bodies, trying to keep the metal minimally warm. Others enter combat practically unarmed. And then comes the real horror. The wounded cease to be merely wounded. A man shot who on another front would have a chance of surviving now dies in minutes. The blood freezes in the wound. The thermal shock kills faster than the bullet. Doctors can do nothing but watch. Men begin to fall without a single shot being fired. They sit in the snow to rest for just a minute. Exhaustion wins. The cold envelops them. Their eyes close. When someone tries to wake them, they are already stiff, covered by a thin layer of ice, their faces too calm for those who died in war. The trenches became tombs. The ground is so hard, it's impossible to dig. Bodies are piled up, used as makeshift barriers against the wind and enemy fire. The smell of death mingles with the icy air, a metallic, sweet, and horrible smell. Morality completely breaks down. The soldiers finally understand that they are not just fighting an army. They are fighting an entire country, and a winter that forgives neither mistakes, nor courage, nor obedience. The Russian winter doesn't strike with explosions. He attacks slowly. He steals fingers, feet, hope, until only silence remains. And for many of those men, at that moment, it was already clear. They would not be defeated in battle. They would be frozen to death. The abandoned soldier, loneliness in the white vastness. At some point, the army ceases to exist as an organized force. Units break apart. Companies get lost. Battalions disappear in the snow. Orders no longer arrive. Radios are silent. What was once a war machine is now a mass of men trying to survive individually. This is where many are left behind. A soldier collapses during the march. His legs simply won't respond anymore. Another tries to help him, pulls by the arm, shouts, begs him to get up. But the cold wins. The weight of the dead or nearly dead body is too much. The column moves forward. Those who stay behind die. Those who help too much die too. The decision is swift, cruel, necessary. The seriously injured are not evacuated. There are no vehicles. There are no stretchers. There is no time. Some receive a last cigarette. Others only a silent stare. No one promises to return because everyone knows that would be a lie. And then comes loneliness. A soldier lone in the snow is too small for that infinite space. The white stretches as far as the eye can see. There aren't enough trees. There aren't any nearby villages. Only wind, silence, and cold. The man walks, stumbles, falls, gets up, walks again. The sound of his own footsteps is the only proof that he is still alive. At night, the fear multiplies. Without shelter, he digs a shallow hole with his hands, with his bayonet, with whatever he has. The ground is hard as stone. The wind blows mercilessly. He huddles up, hugging his own body, trying to preserve some warmth. The cold seeps in through his eyes, his ears, his thoughts. Many cry in silence, not out of pain, but out of knowing that no one will come. There is no rescue. There is no glory. There is no medal. Only the possibility of dying right there without witnesses, without a name, without a story. Some soldiers begin to talk to themselves. Others see things that aren't there. A house in the distance, a campfire, voices calling. The cold begins to play tricks on their minds, offering false hope to make death sweeter. When the snow falls again, it covers everything. Copper glued on. It covers bodies. It covers the proof that that man was there. The abandoned soldier does not die in combat. He disappears, and the war goes on, as if he never existed. Hunger, fear, and despair. After the cold comes hunger, and it hurts in a different way. At first, the stomach merely complains, an uncomfortable, bearable emptiness. But the days go by and the food doesn't arrive. The rations are gone or too frozen to chew. Men break off pieces of stale bread by banging them against their rifles. Others suck on ice cubes to trick their bodies, pretending it's food. It is not. Weakness spreads quickly, legs grow heavy, heads spin, vision blurs at the edges. Soldiers stumble for no reason, fall, and are slow to get up. Each step requires a strength that no longer exists. Fear grows along with hunger. It's not just fear of the Soviet enemy, it's fear of not waking up. Fear of closing your eyes and letting the cold win. Fear of being the next to be left behind, abandoned in the snow like so many others. Some people start doing unthinkable things. Dead horses are hastily butchered while still frozen. The meat is tough, raw and bloody. Even so, it is eaten. Some men eat leather from boots, belts, anything that can be chewed. Others steal their companion's rations while he sleeps, if he even sleeps. Discipline dissolves. The army that marched confidently is now a group of starving survivors. There are no more heroic speeches, no more music, only the sound of the wind, heavy breathing and chattering teeth. Desperation changes people. Men who once helped each other now avoid contact, afraid to share what little they have left. Suspicious glances replace camaraderie. The war, at that point, is no longer against an external enemy. It's against their own bodies, which are slowly beginning to shut down. And yet, they move forward, not out, of courage. Not because of ideology, but because to stop is to die. Hunger weakens, fear paralyzes, and desperation pushes men towards decisions they would never be proud of. Winter observes everything in silence. He knows that when a man starts eating what he shouldn't, defeat is already written in the stars. The cold inside the body, death that arrives while sleeping. The cold is no longer just outside. It lives inside men, an invisible and relentless tenant that settles in their veins, bones, and the deepest recesses of their souls. In the vast theater of horrors that was the Eastern Front of World War II, where the Russian winter rose like a merciless colossus, this cold was not a mere climatic whim. It was a weapon forged by nature, allied with the Soviets, that claimed lives with glacial patience. Think of the German soldiers of the Wehrmacht, launched into Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 with promises of swift victory, only to be engulfed by a winter that transformed the continent into a collective tomb. Temperatures plummeting beyond 40 degrees below zero, winds howling like tormented souls, snow piling up in endless mounds. These were the silent allies of the Red Army, and they did not forgive human weakness. At first, the fingers lose feeling, a subtle tingling that spreads like a subtle plague. Soldiers, many of them young recruits plucked from peaceful villages in Bavaria or the Prussian plains, try to ignore it, slapping their gloved hands against their thighs, stomping the hardened ground to rekindle circulation. They laugh nervously, telling crude jokes about the general winter that the Russians so feared in past wars, such as the Napoleonic invasion of 1812, when the same cold decimated the French Grande Armée, leaving piles of frozen bodies along the retreat from Moscow. But the laughter evaporates like smoke in the frigid air. The numbness advances, a treacherous invader that conquers territory inch by inch, from feet to ankles, from hands to wrists, rising like an inexorable tide to the core of their being. Cases of frostbite multiply, an epidemic of dead flesh spreading through the makeshift camps. Fingers turn white as curdled milk, then bluish like exposed veins, and finally black as rotting coal. Skin cracks in deep fissures, bleeding red drops that instantly freeze in the air, forming scarlet crystals. But the most terrifying thing is the absence of pain. The cold anesthetizes before killing, a false mercy that deceives the victim into lethal complacency. When the pain returns, it is a reborn hell, throbbing, excruciating, as if needles of ice were piercing the soul. Many soldiers in despair bite dirty rags to stifle their screams, while comrades watch helplessly, knowing that the same fate awaits them in the next blizzard. Field medics face their own personal hell, a purgatory of impossible decisions under tattered tents trembling in the wind. Without adequate heating, campfires forbidden so as not to attract enemy artillery. Without medicines like antibiotics or morphine, scarce in supply lines disrupted by the autumnal mud that preceded the ice, without sterilized instruments, they become reluctant executioners. Cruel triage. Who can still be saved? The 18-year-old boy with feet frozen up to his knees, or the veteran with gangrene in his fingers. Amputations are performed hastily, with dull blades rusted from constant use, sores stained with coagulated blood and frozen pus. The smell of burnt flesh and infection hangs in the air, mixed with the stench of slowly decomposing bodies. Men scream until their voices fail, faint in pools of their own blood, sometimes die during the procedure, their hearts giving way to shock and utter terror. Others wake up without feet, without hands, without a future, mutilated, dependent, destined for a life of begging on the post-war streets, if they even survive the journey back home. But the cruelest death is silent, a lethal whisper, disguised as peace. Hypothermia arrives like a deceptive embrace, a treacherous lover promising rest amidst the chaos. The body, exhausted from endless marches, chronic hunger and bloody battles, begins to produce a false sensation of warmth, a thermal delirium that deceives the senses. The soldier feels sleepy, a heavy, comfortable sleep, irresistible as the song of a siren. He sits against a frost-covered log, leans against the soft snow that feels like a feather mattress, closes his eyes. Just for a moment. In that instant, his metabolism slows, his heart beats slower, his lungs inhale rarefied air. Comrades try to wake him, shaking his body as rigid as an ice statue, shouting his name in voices hoarse from the cold. Nothing. His skin is already too cold, bluish under the dim light of the aurora borealis that dances in the sky like a harbinger of doom. His eyes do not respond, glazed over in an eternal void. The war has claimed another, without firing a single shot, without glory, without witnesses beyond the howling wind. At night, the living sleep beside the dead, a macabre companionship forced by scarcity, not by choice, but by lack of options. The frozen bodies, rigid as planks, become barriers against the biting wind that penetrates like blades. They become makeshift shields against shrapnel from grenades, piles that block the advance of the snow. They become part of the landscape, merging into the infinite white, indistinguishable from fallen tree trunks or covered rocks. The smell of death is muffled by the ice, but the psychological terror is overwhelming. Waking up next to a friend who laughed hours before, now a corpse with open, accusing eyes, frozen in an expression of eternal surprise. Dreams tormented by visions of distant homes, mothers crying, brides waiting in vain, mingle with the real nightmare where the cold transforms men into inanimate objects. Names become numbers in cold reports sent to Berlin, where bureaucrats warmed in. Luxurious offices tally casualties like pieces on a chessboard. Stories become silence. The farmer who dreamed of abundant harvests, the philosophy student who quoted Nietzsche in the trenches, the family man who carried crumpled photos of his children, all reduced to mute echoes in the wind. Lives become ice, fragile and ephemeral, crackling under other people's boots. At this point, many soldiers understand something terrible. It doesn't take courage to die there. It only takes exhaustion. Physical and mental depletion, the weight of despair that crushes the spirit like an avalanche, makes surrender to eternal sleep an irresistible temptation. And winter, patient as an ancient predator, awaits exactly that, weaving its web of frost around broken souls. Expand upon this, and the horror multiplies. Remember the historical accounts. Though without names or sources, they paint vivid pictures. Soldiers digging trenches with frozen shovels, only to find soil as hard as iron. Entire units lost in blizzards, wandering in circles until collapse. Rats and crows feasting on half-buried bodies, while the living envy the dead for the peace they have found. The fear is not only of the enemy, it is of one's own body betraying, of the mind faltering under the sensory assault. Despair settles in like a dense fog. Why fight when the end is inevitable? Pure terror in the nocturnal solitude, hearing the crackling of ice like ghostly footsteps, imagining Soviets emerging from the mist for the final slaughter. And so, the cold does not only kill the flesh, it devours the human essence, leaving empty shells in a white desert of oblivion. Impossible orders. Resist until the last man. Even in the face of imminent collapse, the orders kept coming. Ghosts of paper carried by exhausted messengers or transmitted by crackling radios, echoing from distant bunkers in Berlin or heated headquarters in Smolensk. Short, cold messages, far removed from the reality of the field. Hold, position at all costs, do not retreat an inch, resist to the last man and the last bullet. Generals warmed by colorful maps and optimistic reports, like the Führer himself in his Wolfschanze, demanded sacrifices from men who had nothing left to give. No blood, no hope, no soul. In the Battle of Moscow in 1941, or in the Siege of Stalingrad in 1942-1943, where the German Sixth Army was trapped in a cauldron of death, these orders sealed the fate of hundreds of thousands, transforming strategy into carnage. The soldiers read the orders and exchanged silent glances, deep-set eyes fixed on bearded faces hollowed by hunger. With what weapons to resist? Frozen Mauser and MG-42 rifles, lubricants hardened by the cold, mechanisms jammed as if the metal itself rebelled against human madness. With what ammunition? Boxes emptied in futile counterattacks, supplies blocked by impassable roads, where trucks sank into deep snow or were shot at by Soviet partisans emerging from the forests. Like vengeful specters, With what bodies? Men reduced to shadows of themselves, weakened by minimal rations, bread as hard as stone, watery soup from dead horses, occasionally human flesh in whispered accounts of desperate cannibalism in the worst pockets of siege. The defensive positions are little more than holes in the snow, shallow pits dug with bayonets and bare hands, where the wind seeps in like a thief, stealing the last vestige of warmth. There is not enough wood to reinforce shelters. Doom, plundered forests, logs burned in ephemeral bonfires that summon death from the sky in the form of Soviet Katyushas. There is no fuel to keep fires burning without giving away the position, revealing flickering silhouettes to enemy snipers waiting patiently in the shadows. Men tremble uncontrollably, teeth chattering in irregular rhythms, fingers so stiff they can barely pull the trigger, much less reload accurately. The cold transforms warriors into trembling statues, where a simple sneeze can betray their presence and summon an artillery barrage. Still, they are forced to fight, driven by a mixture of ingrained duty and terror of court-martial. When the Soviet attack begins, waves of T-34s roaring across the frozen plain, infantry in white camouflage coats advancing like ghosts. Many Germans fire a single shot, and the weapon misfires, the frozen firing pin denying the final shot. Others use grenades with thick gloves, numb fingers fighting against slippery pins, premature explosions mutilating the launchers themselves in spurts of blood that freeze in midair. Some advance with bayonets fixed, not out of heroic bravery, but because there is no other option. Ammunition depleted, retreat forbidden, certain death in every direction. Soviet shouts of "hooray" mingle with German screams of terror as tanks crush bodies beneath tracks, leaving trails of red entrails in the pristine snow. The dead pile up in grotesque heaps, bodies intertwined in frozen poses of agony. Eyes wide open in eternal shock. There is no organized retreat, only chaotic escapes interrupted by conflicting orders. There is no evacuation for the wounded, who cry out for help that doesn't come. Mutter! Hilfe! Echoing in the void, gradually silenced by the cold that freezes the blood in their veins before it even drains away. Some are silenced by the cold even before bleeding to death, their bodies entering hypothermic shock, a cruel mercy amidst the chaos. Others beg not to be left behind. Don't abandon me, comrades. Pleas that no one can fulfill, for carrying a companion means condemning oneself to immobility and certain death. The living trample over the fallen, tears freezing on their faces, hearts hardening like the ground around them. Obedience becomes a death sentence, an invisible shackle forged in Berlin and tightened on the front lines. Soldiers realize, in moments of terrifying clarity, that they are no longer being commanded to win, but to buy time. Time for others to retreat, for lines further back to reorganize, for the high command to save face on distant maps. They are the delay, the cannon fodder, the human sacrifice on an altar of imperial ambition, and many know this, whispering curses against leaders who have never felt the icy grip on their lungs. Even so, they continue, not out of blind loyalty to the regime, but because disobedience also means death. Execution by firing squad for desertion, or capture by the Soviets, where gulags and torture await as fates worse than icy oblivion. The orders echo in the icy void, emotionless, faceless, without accountability, mere words on paper condemning thousands. And there, in that snow stained with blood and frozen urine, it becomes clear. It is not only the soldiers who have been abandoned. Reason has also been abandoned, buried under layers of fanatical ideology and flawed strategy. Fear intertwines with hopelessness. Fear of failing, of dying in vain, of never seeing the spring sun again. Hopelessness that corrodes like acid, whispering that victory is an illusion, that the end is inevitable. Absolute terror in the realization that the war is no longer against a human enemy, but against primordial forces. The winter, the Russian vastness, the indifference of the command. Men break, minds fragment, some laugh hysterically as they shoot at shadows, others murmur forgotten prayers, begging for a miracle that will never come. Expand further, and the abyss deepens. Stories of units like the 6th Army at Stalingrad, where Paulus hesitated to break the siege out of strict obedience, leading 91,000 to surrender and death in forced marches to Siberia. Or the Soviet counteroffensives in 1941, where Germans defended devastated villages, using ruined churches as fortresses, only to be buried by artillery avalanches. The dread of endless nights, where auroras illuminate battlefields like infernal spotlights, revealing horrors, severed limbs, disfigured faces, lost souls. Despair in letters never sent. Dreams of warm homes evaporating in the cold air. Terror in solitude, knowing that each order is a step towards the abyss, where humanity dissolves into ice and blood. And so, the Eastern Front was not just a campaign, it was a personal apocalypse, where man confronts absolute emptiness and loses. The Soviet advance, the enemy that doesn't freeze. When the Red Army attacks, the difference is brutal, an insurmountable abyss carved not only by military tactics, but by the very essence of the land they defend. Soviet soldiers emerge from the snow like living shadows, specters forged in the heart of Siberia, where winter is not an adversary, but an ancestral companion. They are better dressed, in thick fur coats and valenki, felt boots that insulate against the cold like a second skin, better adapted to the harsh climate that has shaped generations of peasants and warriors. Accustomed to that white hell since birth, they move with a predatory grace, firm and determined, while the wind howls around them like a victory hymn. For them, winter is no surprise. It is an ally, an invisible giant that weakens the invader and strengthens the defender, echoing the lessons of past wars, such as the one in 1812 against Napoleon, when the same General Winter decimated foreign armies in chaotic retreats, leaving trails of frozen bones from Ukraine to Poland. Artillery cuts its way through with a primal roar, cannons like the Katyusha, nicknamed Stalin's organs by the terrified Germans, unleashing salvos of rockets that tear through the frozen silence like the claws of a leviathan. Explosions erupt in cascades of fire and ice, snow flying in clouds stained with dark earth and scarlet blood, painting the horizon with apocalyptic hues. Makeshift trenches, mere furrows in the icy crust dug with numb shovels, vanish under the devastating impact, swallowing whole men in smoking craters. Soldiers are hurled into the air like rag dolls, limbs contorted at impossible angles, falling back to earth with dull thuds that echo like final sentences. Many die without even understanding where the attack came from, their senses dulled by cold and fatigue, their eyes glazed over in a grey sky that seems indifferent to their abrupt end. The Germans attempt a response, a last gasp of resistance amidst the chaos, but the effort is pathetic, torn apart by the betrayal of their own bodies. Some fire successfully, bullets tracing ephemeral lines in the frigid air, reaping Soviet lives in sporadic retaliations. Others struggle against weapons that insist on failing, MG-42 machine guns jammed by ice accumulating in their mechanisms, Kar-98K rifles with triggers as stiff as stone. Reaction time is slow, agonizingly slow, as if the entire world had been submerged in frozen honey. Fingers do not obey, numb from a numbness that spreads like a curse, robbing the speed, strength and precision that once defined the German blitzkrieg. What was once an invincible war machine in the summer of 1941, advancing across the steppes with roaring panzer tanks, is now reduced to trembling men, eyes bloodshot with dread, whispering prayers to gods who seem to have abandoned the front lines. The combat is short and cruel, a macabre dance where mercy is a forgotten luxury. Soviet soldiers advance in inexorable waves, shouting hoarse orders in Russian, "Ura! Za Rodinu!" confident as predators sniffing out the weakness of their prey. They know that the enemy ahead is tired, hungry, frozen to the bone. Skeletal bodies wrapped in inadequate uniforms, rations reduced to crumbs of stale bread and melted snow soup. They know they don't need to win with elegance, just press on, relentlessly, like the winter itself that favors them, pushing the Germans towards the abyss of defeat. Bayonets gleam under the pale light of the winter sun, cutting flesh and dreams with equal ferocity, while grenades explode in bursts of shrapnel that pierce skin and soul. Many Germans flee, not out of cowardice that military manuals would condemn, but out of primal instinct, the last vestige of self-preservation in minds shattered by terror. To remain means to die right there, riddled with bullets or crushed under the tracks of T-34 tanks advancing like invincible behemoths, painted white to blend into the landscape. But escape is also dangerous, a leap into the void, where the terrain is open, covered in virgin snow that betrays every step, with no shelter, beyond mounds of ice or the ruins of burned villages. Soviet machine guns sweep the field with incessant bursts, bullets tracing lines of death that reap lives in random sequences, men falling one by one, leaving red trails on the infinite white, like brushstrokes of a maddened painter. Bodies writhe in final agony, hands outstretched in silent pleas, while the snow slowly covers them, erasing their existence. Some are captured, dragged from the chaos into an even darker limbo. Prisoners stagger forward, hands raised in trembling surrender, eyes as empty as bottomless pits, reflecting the emptiness of broken souls. Many are so weak they can barely stand, legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion and hypothermia, faces hollowed by hunger that devours from the inside out. For them, the war is over, but the suffering is not, stretching out in forced marches along icy roads, where the cold bites like beasts, hunger gnaws at the insides, and the uncertain fate in prisoner-of-war camps. In Siberia, where the eternal ice claims more victims than the battles, whispered accounts speak of brutal interrogations, forced labor in mines where the sun never rises, and a mortality that transforms survivors into walking ghosts. Others simply disappear, swallowed by the snow, the chaos, death without witnesses, as if winter had claimed them for itself. Bodies lost in sudden blizzards, buried under avalanches or sunk in frozen rivers that break apart under the weight, leaving only echoes of muffled screams. The Soviet advance is not only military, it is psychological, a tide of terror that floods German minds, confirming what they already felt deep down. The war had turned against them. The impetus of the 1941 invasion dissipated like smoke in the cold wind, and winter chose its side, allying itself with the defenders of Mother Russia, transforming the front into a slaughterhouse where hope is the first casualty. From that moment on, it was no longer a matter of holding positions, tooth and nail. It was a matter of escaping with your life, a desperate calculation where every breath was a Pyrrhic victory. If that was even possible, in a world where the horizon closed in like a trap and terror settled in like a parasite, devouring the remaining courage. Fear was palpable, a suffocating, icy cloak. Fear of the next bombing, of the Soviet soldier emerging from the mist, of your own comrade who might abandon you to save himself. Despair that corroded like acid, whispering that the promised glory was an illusion, that the invincible Reich was now a bleeding carcass in the snow. Absolute terror in the realization that the enemy did not freeze, did not falter, advanced like a force of nature, while the Germans dissolved into icy dust, lost souls in a white purgatory. Expand upon this, and the horror unfolds in endless layers. Consider the Soviet counteroffensives of December 1941, when Zhukov orchestrated the siege of Moscow, pushing the Germans back with fresh Siberian divisions adapted to the cold that paralyzed the invaders. Or Stalingrad, where the advancing Red Army transformed streets into slaughterhouses, buildings into tombs. German soldiers, once confident in Aryan superiority, now tremble at the sound of footsteps in the snow, imagining endless hordes of Soviets, faces hardened by Stalinist suffering, eyes burning with vengeance for burned villages and massacred families. Despair manifests itself in torn diaries, letters never sent, where men confess the collapse of faith. Winter hates us, and the Russians are its favorite children. Terror in the solitude of the night sentries, hearing the crackling of ice like demonic laughter, knowing that dawn will bring more waves of death. And so the advance is not merely a movement of troops, it is the collapse of an empire, a symphony of terror where each note is a muffled scream in the eternal snow. Chaotic retreats, the escape through the snow. When the order to retreat finally arrives, it brings not relief, but a whirlwind of panic that sweeps through the ranks like a sudden blizzard. There is no meticulous plan, drawn on maps warmed by distant generals. No clear routes marked on roads that the ice has turned into traps. No time to coordinate, only the word retreat echoing among men already broken, souls fragmented by the accumulated weight of months of suffering. What should be an organized maneuver, a tactical replegue to preserve forces, becomes a desperate race. For survival, a chaotic exodus where humanity dissolves into animal instincts. Columns hastily form, a disorderly mass of soldiers, wounded dragged on makeshift stretchers of branches and rags, cooks carrying empty pots like useless relics, radio operators with heavy equipment that hinders every step, all mixed together in a pathetic human flow, some still carrying rusty weapons, others having dropped everything along the way, rifles abandoned in the snow, ammunition scattered like sterile seeds. To walk faster, easing the burden multiplied by the cold. Abandoned trucks lie scattered like frozen carcasses of prehistoric beasts, engines choked by frost. Panzer tanks left behind, motionless like monuments to failure, useless without fuel or spare parts that the interrupted supplies never delivered. The snow makes every step difficult, a treacherous carpet that swallows boots and hopes, turning the march into a slow torture. Men slip on hidden patches of ice, fall into soft mounds that engulf them up to their waists, are trampled by companions driven mad by terror, boots crushing bones and dignity. Those who fall and cannot get up quickly enough remain, abandoned to their cruel fate, pleading eyes finding only turned backs. While the group advances like a merciless river, no one stops, no one looks back for long, fear pushing everyone forward like an invisible whip, lashing minds already lacerated by the guilt of leaving brothers behind. The road becomes a moving cemetery, a funeral procession where the living envy the dead for the peace they have found. The wounded plead for help in hoarse voices. Kamerad, hilf mir, extending trembling hands covered in frozen blood. Some are carried for a few meters on exhausted shoulders, then abandoned when the weight becomes unbearable, left at the edge of the trail like discarded baggage. Exhausted horses, once vital for pulling cannons and supplies, collapse with pathetic neighs and are immediately butchered. Mid-march by blunt knives, raw meat devoured to appease voracious hunger, blood running over the ice and freezing almost instantly into red crystals, a macabre feast under the relentless sky. The enemy gives no respite, pursuing like a relentless predator that smells blood. Soviet artillery reaches the retreating columns with demonic precision, explosions erupting amidst the human flow, scattering dismembered bodies, heart-rending screams, and utter confusion. Machine guns cut through the snow, with bursts that reap lives in entire swathes, bullets piercing skin and dreams, leaving trails of contorted bodies like grotesque sculptures. There is no shelter in open fields, no defense other than running faster than your comrade beside you, or dying trying, the air filled with the stench of gunpowder, fear, and exposed entrails. Night makes everything worse, a cloak of darkness that transforms chaos into a living nightmare. In absolute darkness, men lose their way from the group, stumbling over frozen roots or falling into hidden ravines. trails disappearing under the fresh snow that falls like a funereal veil. Some go in the wrong direction, guided by deceptive stars or delirious hypothermia, and are never seen again, swallowed by the Russian vastness that stretches like a frozen ocean. Others stop to rest just a minute, leaning against frost-covered tree trunks, and are left behind by their own deadly sleep, their bodies betraying them in a final embrace of ice. Discipline vanishes completely, evaporating like breath in cold air, leaving only primordial chaos. No more ranks matter, generals reduced to common fugitives, soldiers ignoring orders shouted by hoarse officers. There are no more clear commands, only murmurs of panic and the instinct to keep walking, even with feet bleeding inside frozen boots, blisters bursting into icy pus, vision blurred by exhaustion clouding the mind like fog. Bodies drag themselves along in agony, minds fragmented by visions of distant homes, farms in the Rhineland, streets of Berlin, now unreachable, dreams dissolving in the howling wind. The retreat doesn't save everyone. It only decides who dies first, in a cruel lottery where luck is capricious, and who carries the guilt of having survived. A burden heavier than any backpack, haunting future nights with ghosts of the abandoned. The snow continues to fall, covering boot prints, twisted bodies, and strategic errors that sealed destinies, erasing evidence of a human catastrophe. And the war continues, relentless behind them, a shadow stretching across the horizon, promising more horrors on distant fronts. Expand further, and the abyss of despair reveals itself in terrifying depth. Remember the retreats of 1941-1942, when Army Group Center withdrew from Moscow, leaving thousands in mass graves, or the rout at Kursk in 1943, where German columns were hunted down by Soviet planes like prey in an open field, soldiers dragging themselves through endless nights, hearing the roar of approaching enemy tanks, the dread of ambushes by partisans emerging from the forests like demons, silently slitting throats, hopelessness in faces that aged decades in days, sunken eyes reflecting inner emptiness, whispers of suicide as an escape from madness, terror in the realization that escape is illusory, winter a labyrinth without exit, where every step backward is a step towards oblivion, guilt that corrodes survivors, questioning why them and not the friend left to freeze. And so, retreat is not mere movement. It is the dissolution of the collective soul, an exodus into nothingness where man confronts his fragility and succumbs to the primordial terror of the icy unknown. Comrades who saw ghosts, the shadows that marched together. During the retreat, the soldiers learned something they would never forget. The dead don't stay behind all at once. They disappear little by little, like prolonged echoes of a macabre symphony that refuses to be silenced. In the merciless vastness of the Eastern Front, where the Russian winter of 1941-1942 transformed the German retreat into an exodus of broken souls, this lesson was etched into the flesh and spirit of the survivors. Imagine the columns of Army Group Center, once an overwhelming force that devoured kilometers in Operation Barbarossa, now reduced to ragged ranks snaking across snowy plains, pursued by the Red Army and the specter of annihilation. The cold was not just a climatic enemy, it was a patient gravedigger burying the fallen under layers of frost, while the living carried the invisible burden of memories that became inner hauntings. The dead did not depart abruptly. They dissipated into fragments, a last breath, a glazed look, a silhouette swallowed by the whiteness, leaving scars that time would never heal. At first, there are still attempts to help, desperate gestures of camaraderie that echo the vows of loyalty made in heated tents in distant Germany. An arm extended to pull a comrade who slips on the treacherous snow, a shoulder offered to support the weight of a wounded man whose legs falter like dry branches in the wind. A comrade being dragged through the snow, the furrows left by his body like trails of frozen blood and sweat, while hoarse voices encourage, "Get up, Fritz, just a little more." But the human body has limits, boundaries imposed by exhaustion that winter amplifies like a cruel amplifier. After hours marching in the extreme cold, with temperatures plunging beyond 30 degrees below zero, winds that cut like sharp blades, hunger that gnaws at the insides like voracious rats, and fear that pulses in the veins like poison, even friendship weighs too heavily. What was solidarity becomes a grim calculation. Carrying another means, risking one's own collapse, condemning oneself to the same icy fate. And so the bonds unravel, thread by thread, amidst the howling wind that seems to laugh at human frailty. A man stumbles, his numb feet betraying him on a patch of ice hidden beneath the soft snow, falling face first into the endless white with a dull thud that echoes like an omen. Another falls to his knees, his body bending like a puppet whose strings have been cut, hands digging into the ice in a silent plea for strength that has already vanished. A third simply stops, motionless as an ice statue, his eyes fixed on the empty horizon, his chest rising and falling in increasingly spaced breaths, as if his heart hesitated to continue. Beating. No one says anything, words frozen in their throats by the terrifying understanding of the inevitable. Those who continue walking avoid looking back, turning their faces to the biting wind that gnaws at their cheeks, knowing exactly what they would see. A motionless body, breathing ever slower, eyes open in an empty stare, or closed in peaceful surrender, already beginning to lose the fight against the lethal embrace of hypothermia. To stop means to die together, to join the fallen in a shared grave under the relentless snow. To move forward means to live, with the weight of choice, a guilt that settles like a parasite in the soul, devouring sanity piece by piece. The snow does the rest, falling slowly, delicate flakes accumulating like a funereal veil, woven by invisible hands. It covers boots first, immobilizing feet in icy tombs, then entire legs, transforming bodies into indistinct mounds, and finally whole bodies, erasing human outlines under a uniform white layer. In a few hours, that soldier who marched kilometers under enemy fire fought in bloody battles like those of Vyazma or Rzhev, where entire divisions were decimated in Soviet counteroffensives, and suffered the horrors of hunger and cold, becomes just a white mound on the ground, a subtle undulation in the landscape that the wind shapes like an indifferent sculptor. No name engraved on a plaque, no cross erected in memory, no formal farewell, only the eternal silence of the Russian steppe, where winter claims its tributes without ceremony. The living pass by these mounds, stepping alongside with instinctive care, but terror creeps in. What if the next mound is me? Despair grows like a shadow lengthened by the setting sun, whispering that everyone will end up like this, anonymous and forgotten. The living begin to recognize the signs, subtle marks that punctuate the trail of retreat like crumbs from a dark fairy tale. A helmet abandoned by the roadside, rusty and covered in frost, its inner lining still holding the ghostly warmth of a head that pulsed with thoughts of home. A gun stuck in the ice, its barrel pointing to the sky like an accusing finger, abandoned when its owner could no longer carry it, its stiff fingers refusing to release the final trigger. A body leaning against a solitary tree, its trunk twisted like a vigilant sentinel, its posture suggesting the man was merely resting, eyes half closed in a sleep that had become eternal, bluish lips whispering unspoken. Secrets. They pass these ghosts in absolute silence, the air heavy with a morbid respect mixed with primal dread. There is no time to pray. The prayers frozen on their lips before they are uttered. There are not enough tears, the sobs freezing before they leave the eyes. forming salt crystals on the eyelashes. Each man carries his dead inside, piled up in memory like firewood for a bonfire that never warms, making each step heavier with every kilometer, each breath an effort against the invisible weight of accumulated loss. Some soldiers begin to speak of their comrades in the past, even knowing they died hours ago. A desperate denial that erects barriers against the overwhelming reality. Remember Hans, he was good with jokes, they say in low voices around ephemeral campfires, as if their friend still marched beside them, invisible but present. It's a way of denying the emptiness, of filling the empty spaces with echoes of past laughter. But terror creeps in when the illusion shatters, a glimpse of a snow-covered body, and the truth erupts like an avalanche. Others stop speaking altogether, silence becoming protection, a shield against the emotional assault that winter amplifies. Words become superfluous in a world where the howling wind and the crackling of ice speak louder, narrating stories of doom that no man wants to hear. War is no longer measured in territories conquered or lost, in maps scribbled by generals warmed in distant bunkers. It is measured in lost faces, in names that dissipate like smoke, in memories that transform into hauntings. Each night, fewer voices answer the roll call, the daily ritual of counting becoming a litany of absences that echoes like a requiem. Hoarse officers call out names: Schmidt, Müller, Weber, and silence answers, a void that grows like an infectious wound. Each morning, more empty spaces in the column, gaps where men once marched with dreams of victory, now filled only by the wind whistling through them. Comrades are not buried with military honors, shovels driven into the hard earth to dig shallow graves. They are swallowed by the landscape, assimilated into the infinite white that claims them as its own. And those who remain alive understand something terrible. If they keep walking, stumbling forward with blind determination, perhaps they will survive physically, reaching friendly lines or prisoner of war camps where the suffering continues in another form. But they will never again be the same men who marched confidently eastward, full of propaganda of racial superiority and promises of quick glory, treading the Ukrainian steppes with polished boots and inflamed hearts. Because ghosts don't just stay in the snow, buried under layers of frost that the spring thaw will reveal as putrid horrors. They march alongside forever within those who survived, inner shadows that manifest in sleepless nights, in nightmares where familiar faces emerge from the mist, accusing eyes, questioning, "Why did you leave me?" Terror settles in as a constant presence, an invisible companion, whispering doubts in the darkness, corroding sanity with icy claws. Despair that spreads like gangrene, convincing one that survival is a curse, not a blessing. Living to carry the burden of memories that weigh more than any backpack, to face a post-war world where the mutilated of body and soul are relegated to the shadows of society. A primal fear that the ghosts will one day take control, leading the survivor to join them in a final act of surrender, a bullet in the temple, or a deliberate step into the icy abyss. Expand upon this, and the abyss of horror unfolds to unfathomable depths. Consider the retreats of 1943-1944, such as after the Battle of Kursk, where German units fled through snowy forests, leaving trails of ghosts, soldiers frozen in postures of agony, hands outstretched as if pleading for mercy from the indifferent sky, or the forced marches of German prisoners captured at Stalingrad, where the Soviets dragged them eastward, and the fallen became white mounds along the route, mute witnesses to the collapse. Soldiers reported night visions, where the dead rose from the snow to march alongside, pale faces whispering recriminations, mixing hallucinations of hypothermia with real guilt. Despair manifested itself in collective muteness, silent columns like funeral processions, where the only sound was the crunch of snow under torn boots. Terror lay in the realization that each lost comrade was a piece of themselves left behind, fragmenting their identity until only an empty shell remained. And so, the comrades who saw ghosts were not mere survivors. They were bearers of a dark legacy, haunted by an invisible legion that the Russian winter immortalized in their souls, a burden that would echo through generations in whispered stories of a war that devoured not only bodies, but human essences. The psychological breakdown, when the mind gives up before the body. There comes a point when the body can still walk, but the mind has already left. After days, sometimes weeks, of cold, hunger, death, and guilt, something breaks inside. The soldiers continue advancing mechanically, one step after another like human shadows. Their eyes grow empty, their faces harden. The war has stolen more than physical strength. It has stolen the capacity to feel. Some start talking to themselves, disjointed murmurs, names of mothers, wives, children. Others laugh for no reason, a short, broken laugh that is more frightening than screams. Some stop in the middle of the march, stare into nothingness, and simply don't respond to anything around them anymore. Cold weather helps to destroy the mind. Constant exhaustion causes hallucinations. Soldiers swear they see houses in the distance, lights, blazing campfires. Some run towards these visions and fall dead in the open snow. Others hear voices calling their names, promising rest, warmth, peace. The temptation to stop is enormous. Sit for a minute, lie down for a little while, close your eyes. Many know that this means dying, and yet they do it. Not out of ignorance, but because their minds can no longer fight. Officers try to maintain some order, but even they are broken. Shouting doesn't work. Threats don't work. Fear no longer frightens those who have lost everything inside. Humanity is beginning to disappear. Men walk past corpses without reacting. They walk past wounded people begging for help, without changing their pace. Not because they are monsters, but because feeling anything hurts too much. The mind chooses to shut down to protect what remains. It is at this moment that many understand the cruelest truth of war. It's not always the case that the strongest wins. Sometimes the one who goes crazy last wins. Psychological breakdowns don't leave visible marks like frostbite or bullets, but it's deeper than that. She accompanies the surviving soldier. She wakes him up at night. She pursues him long after the war ends. Because some men emerged from that winter walking, but they never came back whole again. The few who survive. When the white hell finally begins to recede, what remains is not an army. They are leftovers. The survivors emerge from the snow as unrecognizable figures. Frozen beards, sunken faces, deep, empty eyes. Many limp. Others walk supported by pieces of wood improvised as crutches. There are men without fingers, without feet, without hands. Vivid reminders of the winter that almost killed them. They don't celebrate. Survival brings no joy. It brings silence. It brings guilt. Each man carries an invisible list of names that never returned. Friends who sat in the snow, comrades who asked for help one last time. Faces that appear every time they close their eyes. Some arrive at medical centers too late. Infected wounds, advanced frostbite, amputations are inevitable. Doctors cut away dead flesh while soldiers bite on soiled rags to stifle their screams. The smell of blood and despair permeates the makeshift shelters. Others don't even make it. They fall just a few kilometers from salvation. The body endures as long as it can, then it gives up. The line between surviving and dying is as thin as a layer of ice. Those who resist are sent behind the lines. There they receive hot soup, blankets, and silence. Many are unable to eat. Their stomachs can no longer accept food. Some cannot sleep. Others sleep excessively, as if trying to recover. Everything at once. And then comes the question that nobody asks out loud. Why did I survive? There is no answer. It wasn't courage. It wasn't force. It was by chance. It was about being one step ahead. It was either falling at the right time or not falling at all. These men return home changed, if they return at all. Many will never be able to explain what they went through. How can they recount that their greatest enemy wasn't wearing a uniform? That the cold killed more than the bullets? The few who survive do not see themselves as winners. They see themselves as witnesses, and what they witnessed was the absolute limit of human potential. The battlefield. After the storm, when winter begins to recede, he does not take his dead with him. The snow melts slowly, as if you were reluctant to reveal what you've hidden for months. Gradually, the white ground turns into dark mud, and then the bodies emerge. First, one hand, then a helmet, then a face, frozen in the last instant of life. The battlefield reappears like a nightmare awakening. Men scattered for miles, exactly where they fell, some still sitting, leaning against trees or rocks, as if merely resting. Others huddled along the retreat roads, marking the path of escape with their own deaths. There are no suitable graves. Many bodies are unrecognizable. Skin blackened by the cold, uniforms torn, documents destroyed by the damp, names lost forever. They are soldiers who simply ceased to exist as individuals and became numbers at best. Rusty equipment emerges from the mud, bent rifles, crushed helmets, boots with missing feet. Each object tells a silent story of someone who believed they would survive another day. Local residents watch from a distance. For them, this is no surprise. Winter always wins. They've seen it before. Armies come and go, but the snow remains, patiently waiting for the next human mistake. For those returning to the battlefield, the impact is devastating. Surviving officers and soldiers recognize places they've been, remember those who fell there. The memory hurts more than the cold ever did. Each body found is confirmation. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't an exaggeration. The destruction was real, total. The war left deep scars on that land, but it left even deeper marks on the men who walked along it. The battlefield after the storm is not just a physical location. It is a cruel reflection of what happens when arrogance, haste, and disregard for nature collide. And the snow, which seemed silent and neutral, proves that it was the witness and the judge of everything. In the Eastern Campaign, fate was not decided by generals or battles, but by winter. Confident in a quick war, the German army ignored the weather, the terrain, and human limitations, and paid the price. The cold punished haste, exposed logistical flaws, and destroyed weapons, bodies, and minds. Soldiers were maimed, silenced, or simply disappeared under the snow. The lesson was brutal. Courage does not overcome the cold. Orders do not replace preparation, and no army is invincible when it ignores nature. The Russian winter was not just another chapter of the war. It was the moment when everything changed, reminding the world that, in the end, it is winter that decides.